Just waiting for a couple more people to trickle in, and then I'll start off with introductions. Hi, Rob. How's it going?
Good. How are you doing, Jasmine?
Good. Right. Hi, Nikhil. How's it going? Welcome.
Hi,
Thanks so much for
Jasmine.
joining us today. Our
No
guest
problem.
speaker. We're so excited to hear. I'm so excited to hear about what you have to say. So I think this will
Looking
be a
forward
really
to
great
it.
webinar, and we'll have some really great insights. It'll be fantastic. Perfect. Okay, it's 12:01. I want to, get started on time. So I'm going to go ahead, introduce myself, introduce Rob, introduce Nikhil, of course, and then we'll kick off from there. So thanks for joining our March webinar on Next Gen Workplaces. Today, we're here to talk about some differences between Gen Z and Millennials compared to other generations and how to create multi-generational workplaces that empower and serve everyone. I'm Jasmine. I'm the marketing coordinator here at IC. I'm a bona fide proud Gen Z, and I'll be sharing some of my personal insights about how my workplace helps me thrive. But first, let me introduce Nikhil and Rob Nicole. So Nikhil Ravel is a leadership, learning, and change OD expert and passionately believes in the role of learning in its many forms to lift societies it serves. He believes organizations we work for also have the responsibility to serve society, and at the intersection of these two forces is leadership development. With over 25 years of experience split between US and Asia, he's worked with companies like American Express, Franklin Temple, and Charles Schwab. He's the author of best-selling book Target Gen Z and the host of the popular podcast Working with Gen Z, which examines all facets of the Gen Z generation. Thank you so much, Nikhil, for joining us here as our special guest speaker.
Thank you, Jasmine. Lovely to be here and looking forward to our webinar.
Yeah, of course. So Rob Nickel is the CEO of Internet Connections. First joining as the VP of Software Development, Rob now captains IC as we sail into the future of internal communications. He is passionate about helping organizations seize every moment, craft memorable employee experiences, and is a dedicated father of three. I'll pass it over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Jasmine. Appreciate it, and really thankful to have both of you here alongside with me. You to represent the Gen Zs across the entire world here. No pressure on your shoulders. And Nikhil, I know you've got a great background in terms of the books and TED Talks and all this stuff. I know you've got a wealth of knowledge on this topic, so really excited to hear some of your points and ask you some questions. And the audience, I'm sure, is excited as well. I was just at a conference 2 weeks ago taking in a speaker about Gen Z, millennials, and there's a stat that 50% of the workforce is now tipped to being a Gen Z and a millennial workforce. So a lot of understanding and insights shared there. So I'm really excited to hear about you. So anyways, I know that Jasmine, you shared one quote, which was that you're doing some research from Deloitte, and it said 70% of organizations say leading a multi-generational workforce is important to their short-term success, but only 10% say they're very ready to address this trend. So I was hoping that maybe you could talk to some of the why behind, why is this important, Nikhil, that we have this conversation and the audience take this in today, and why should we care about the differences between the generations?
Sure. Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Jasmine. And I want to welcome all our guests and colleagues who have joined in, whether it's North America, Europe, or even Asia, as it's late night here. But let me, Rob, to answer your question, I'm going to perhaps just for the next 60 minutes, I'll use my first set of slides just to set some context, and then maybe I'll answer your question. But to answer your question as well, let me first just spend very briefly, very quickly, to make sure everybody's on the same page. I think this is something that hopefully most of us are either familiar or know as we think about our work lives, that most of us can probably think that there are at least 3 or 4 generations that we're kind of dealing with at workplace, but in all, there are about 7 generations. So right from the silent generation up to Gen Alpha, which is even the generation after Gen Z. And so therefore, very quickly to let people know who are the generations. And then, of course, you can see some of the years in which these generations were sort of defined. We'll talk more on, what makes a generation, all of that a little later. But to answer your question, Rob, I think I'm going to put a fun little slide here. Hopefully, I don't know, Jasmine, if you can relate to some of these quotes, but maybe your Gen Z peers can, or even the bosses who are managing the Gen Zs may have sometimes said this or heard this in a meeting that, hey, what's going on? I'm trying to have a conversation and he or she is always on the phone. Or the Gen Z saying that how come everything has to be manual and why can't they use technology? So these are just some representative quotes that I put out there, sort of what I've seen at workplaces, not necessarily of any particular organization. So your question, Rob, about why it matters, it really does matter because there's a real need, and we'll talk about all the sort of consequences and what happens if we don't do it, and what happens, what are the opportunities. But to first set the business case, Rob, I think let's help our listeners and viewers to say that all of us can. I think over the last couple of years we can agree, and we've witnessed that there's so much change that's happened in technology, right? And this is not you don't have to read any literature. You can just see it with the disruptions with AI and ChatGPT and Gemini and Sora, and every day there seems to be something new. And what it is showing is that the curve at which technology is growing, the velocity, the speed of change is not linear anymore, right? And what you see at the bottom is that what was the average sort of the life expectancy of a generation. So if you can see here, over the last 100 years from 1750 to 1850, we had 2.5 generations kind of go through to kind of witness that growth. And then, of course, you have, the average life expectancy was 40, and then it came to 69, and then the experts say that it'll become 90. So the point of the story is that we're at a time where we're seeing so much rapid change in our lives, and Gen Z, one of the youngest generation in the workplace, is they're probably reaching at about 26, 27 in their sort of life, and then they witness so much change. Now, what's the corollary to that? The corollary to that is very simple, which is to say that all of this has an impact on talent and at the workplace, right? So if you look at this slide, what we're saying is that, we've gone from, industry 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0 to 4.0. And I think everybody we've heard those terms hopefully, but you can see on the right-hand side, it's talking about the impact that, each of these industry revolutions have gotten. So for 1.0, it was all about physical labor, engineering skills. Then we focused on standardization. Then we focused largely on what we call STEM skills, which are just the science, technology, engineering, and math. And then, of course, the 4.0, many experts say we're actually at even 5.0, where what you can see here is that there is, what impact does it have on the talent? Well, talent really has to become very agile in learning. And that's where, Rob, the multi-generation sort of facet comes in, right? In other words, if I'm a boomer or I'm an Xer, right? I mean, I may have a wealth of knowledge, but because the change is so fast and so quick and so rapid, I may have to even unlearn a lot of things what I know, right? And that's what we mean by agility, adaptability, and transdisciplinary, right? So I cannot take the view that, hey, listen, I'm just an expert in one thing and I have the solutions to that. I think we've learned from COVID that, COVID presented to us sort of a multidimensional problem, right? We have to think about the pricing of the vaccine and how we ship it and what's the communication strategy. So in many ways, you cannot say that, I've solved by coming up with a vaccine. You have to look at many angles of that. And so therefore, what we're saying is that, the workplace is becoming more complex, problems are becoming complex. Now, for many of us, if you think about the pre-Gen Y generation, there was maybe one template that was given to us to say that, hey, you're going to spend about a quarter of your life studying, you're going to have to go to your college, you're going to get your education done, and then maybe the next 30, 35, 40 years, you're going to be at a job, at a career, right? And you're going to climb up the ladder, and it's your degree. It's the degree that you took, right? Whether it's engineering or whatever it is, you actually kind of said that degree is going to help me climb all the way. And maybe around mid-60s, I kind of reached that pinnacle and I've reached that goal of my life. And, if you were lucky, I mean, nowadays we don't get pension anymore. You would get that pension, and sadly, because life expectancy was at about 67. So, and bad news that you made it out far, and then you're gonna kind of die. But the life expectancy is actually growing. Now, what has changed? What has changed is what we were saying is that I think we can all say that life expectancy is extending more people are working, right? If you go onto a platform like LinkedIn, you're seeing people in their 60s and even late 60s looking for jobs, looking for roles, looking to be part of the gig economy. And engagement has become kind of the buzzword, right? So the only way you can kind of walk, if you're a young Gen Z or even a millennial or an Xer, right? I think engagement is kind of the buzzword. And so one big way you can make that happen is learning and unlearning, right? So learning is the core of how you can navigate through this longer runway that that we all have now. A couple more slides and that's it. I want to share this one, Rob, just as an example, with the caveat that obviously this is not representing any particular, let's say, whether it's Canada or US, but more generally trying to show that in many industries, like if you look at manufacturing or even industry verticals, you're seeing this shift, right? Which is to say that there is a bench of talent or leaders in the system, which are perhaps largely made up of maybe boomers and then Xers. So they take up a chunk of our pie, and then the next two generations will make up the demographic are basically the Gen Ys and the Gen Zs. But if you fast forward out, just as an example, right, what's the shift that you're seeing? And I think to your point, Rob, about the conference that you attended, right? I think this kind of maybe validating some of that, which is to say that,
Totally.
hey, in 10 years from now,
Yeah.
I think the boomers may be kind of seeing the sunset. I think the Xers may have maybe another 10 more years of runway, so another 15 years from now. And then you got millennials and Gen Zs as sort of the mainstream kind of cohort, which is, being in the workplace, right? So it is incumbent upon us to understand what inspires them and, how are they wired and, how do they see things than perhaps what we're seeing in our bosses. So at the core of it all, and then I look at my example, right? I mean, I'm from the X generation. My parents were from a boomer generation. I've got sibling. I have a brother who's from, Y generation. Spouse is from one generation. Children are Gen Z. I work with Y and Gen Z, and then of course the boss. So again, to give you a perspective that each one of us probably has, a combination of some combination of this around us. And what we're trying to tell basically through this slide is that, look, our context matters. I am seeing the world from like the Gen X lens. But remember, my boss is someone from a different lens. I work with colleagues from a different lens. At home, I have a different lens. So it's important to know how I'm wired, and more importantly, if I'm leading someone, why it matters. Now, all of this, if you're not careful and if you really kind of just say, hey, so what? Well, there is a real consequence, and the consequence of that is that, yes, you're going to see people leave. We're seeing so overwhelming statistics, like whether it's in the US or in Canada or over here in Asia, that they're not happy. They're gonna. We're talking about the younger generation. They would say, "I would rather quit," and there isn't any sense of loyalty to say that I want to work at a place where I feel welcome. I want to work to a place where I can kind of see the purpose of why I'm there. And these are some of the things that I've mentioned, where you can see absenteeism, you can see productivity coming down, you can see things like the damage to the brand morale and so on. So I'll promise this is it for slides. But this is, Rob, just to set the context, to let everybody know, like, look, there is a real business case, a compelling business case of why multi-generations matter, right? And technology is moving at a pace where we don't have the answers, and therefore we need a more different cohort, right? And also the demographic shifts happening. So I'll pause there. Let's see if that answered the question, but I'm happy to expand.
Yeah, for sure does. Thanks. And I appreciate you sharing your own illustration of your family and how that relates, because I think we can all relate that way. I know I've got a wife that's a millennial. I'm a Gen Xer. Seems like we got mostly Gen Xers in the audience, and Gen Xers have this short-lived majority of the workforce, which has already passed. Now the millennials are taking over the echo boom generation, right? And then now you're going to have Gen Z. So it's interesting. I was answering as I wanted to be a doctor, right? And seeing all the people with similar answers that wanted to be a doctor, a lawyer, those kinds of profession, which now it's more entrepreneurship and these sorts of things. So interesting to see that, some of the answers from the audience. I myself have an older son that's 12, and we're just talking about work and being, starting work and entrepreneurship. And it was interesting to see they're the digital native, generation, right?
Of
So
course.
completely different world. So it's interesting to see some of the trends, and then the business impacts, as you just touched on, how if we don't pay attention to these trends and shifts in the makeup of our workplace, how that can impact organizations. So with that in mind,
Yeah.
how about you just touch on a little bit on, we went through this period of time where millennials got a lot of flack, harsh criticism for being, their work ethic or lack of work ethic, or as you mentioned, always being on phones or things like that in some of your commentary, or liking avocado toast, Jasmine, some of these, these kinds of things. I like avocado toast anyways, but can you talk a little bit about some of these depictions or characteristics that are held in the workplace for the different generations, like Gen Y and Z, and what those translate into?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Rob. I think when we use the word stereotype, they're exactly just that, right? I mean, if I were to kind of Google and say which is the most narcissistic generation, you will see Gen Y and millennials. But and even if we were to say, hey, listen, if I were to say there were 20 millennials in this, so it's an overgeneralization, right? I think what happened is in 2005 when YouTube first came out, right? I think. I'm trying to remember who was the singer who made it to the top chart. But anyway, that's the time at which the media first sort of came out to say that, watch out Xers and watch out boomers. Here comes the millennial, and this will be the most different generation ever to work with. And I think so much hype was created because on of that, and then the companies were investing in ping pong tables and free food and all of that. And what they found out that they actually found out that millennials were actually becoming more stressed out, and they were actually looking at gig economy. And so I think some of the generalization about entitlement and all of that, it was more hype. And there's research done which says that oftentimes these stereotypes are there because when we look at our past and we say, hey, when I look at my childhood, I had it good, but the present, there is a problem. And if I cannot solve it, I'm happy to blame it on a generation that's there. So there's kind of an almost an escapist way to kind of say that. I can give an example where I worked with a company where the CEO was actually in a town hall actually trying to say that, what, the millennials are much more, and they're sensitive and they appreciate work-life balance than pay. Now, the moment he said that, it actually had a backlash, because then a whole bunch of the millennials said, no, we actually value money too. And the boomers and the Xers also said that we value work-life balance too, right? so I think I think a lot of the stereotypes are just that, and so we have to be careful. And I think it's all about the context. I think the big thing that I always say is that there's the term called confirmation bias, which is to say that if I've grown in a certain way, I believe a certain way, I'll look for evidence which confirms that belief, right? And so I'm not going to look for something different or a different perspective. And I think that's what managers and leaders have to be mindful of that, and they fall into the trap of confirmation bias. Yeah,
makes a lot of sense what you're saying. Being careful of the stereotypes and those kinds of things. What would be some key characteristics that we should pay attention to, though, from these generations, from millennials and then Gen Z, and then Jasmine, maybe you can touch into on how that resonates for you.
Yeah, I just want to kind of go back to Nikhil's point. I want to thank you for bringing up YouTube, because as you said, Rob, we're the digital generation, right? We've always grown up with this thing called the internet. And now, with the proliferation of social media, the way that these stereotypes travel, or how they can travel so fast, is because they have the medium to travel so fast, right? So I think that's something to also keep in mind, is that every generation has always been demonized or devilized, right? So if it wasn't Gen Z before millennials, it was X and then boomers, right? Every generation always blames the next generation for their problems or being entitled and everything like that. And I think we're seeing it really in the cultural zeitgeist right now, because now is the medium in which these stereotypes can travel so fast, travel everywhere, and travel around the world, right? So I think that's something to keep in mind when we're talking about, are these stereotypes true or not, which we have to think about, what are the different ways these can travel and proliferate society now.
Really good point.
Yeah, and I was going to just add one more thing here, Rob. I think just to to build on what Jasmine's saying, I have seen companies to counter some of that. Like, so for example, there was a study, an experiment done at Berkeley where they were trying to, they kind of put together a team of retirees and sort of undergrad students, and they had to together build kind of a wellness product. And they found out that like, there were a lot of these interpersonal issues that were happening. And for small things like where, you know, the young employees would actually text them and then they would ignore the text. And so there was the assumption that like, you know, no, this is not important to them. And they would say that, you know, this is casual. Why are they actually like, you know, writing a text? And so they came up with this concept of an assumption audit, which is to say that like every week they would come and meet together and say that, okay, what assumption are you making about what you've seen and observed, not inferred, right? And therefore, if I see a person sort of acting in a certain way, like I have to share that rather than kind of infer to say that, okay, this is, I think you ignored me or you didn't think I had good ideas, right? And I think when that started happening, a lot of good things started coming out. So the younger generation learned that, look, the older generation doesn't want to see text after work. And when the fact that they were actually texting in the evening, they felt that, look, this is urgent and I'm texting you. And so you should be responding back to me immediately, when they thought that I could do that in the morning, right? And so I think there's a way for that. There was a way in which they adjusted the lens. So again, I think the more you can be aware of that, I think we can overcome these, right? So
yeah, interesting. I've never heard of the assumption audit before in that context. That's really a really good idea. I think you could do that in a workplace setting as well. You know, as you said, like there's the work-life balance, but for some generations there's work-life integration more commonly now versus work-life balance, where it's like, hey, when I'm away from work, I'm off work kind of thing. And there's different perspectives on that. So interesting to hear some of those examples. So let's talk more about the workplace then. How should we adapt in the workplace given these trends and different makeup of our workforce? So as Jasmine already pointed out, you know, Gen Z or digital natives have grown up with the internet. Their remote work is kind of expected now that that's supported in some way, or travel or work, the digital nomad movement, right? You know, I can work from anywhere. These kinds of things. Obviously, it depends on your job and what you're doing, but these trends are there, these pressures. So, you know, how has this affected views of the workplace by these generations, and how we should pay attention to that?
Yeah, I can hop in here
Go for
first
it,
for Nikhil. But I know from my, experience, since I've started entering the workplace and, exiting school, I've only ever had fully remote or hybrid jobs, right? So this idea of going into the office from Monday to Friday, dressing professional, all these things is obscure to me. It's not something that's normal, but I've been used to rolling out of bed. I mean, okay, just to be rolling out of bed 8:30, hopping on a Zoom call at 9, right? That's kind of my normal. So when I look for work, I always look for remote first. To me, remote and hybrid is something that I expect even more than I look for salary. I know that's not the case for a lot of other people, but I really prioritize this flexibility, this ability to kind of work from anywhere, right? Because I think when I think about work now, I think of it as a part of my life that's supposed to add to my life, not something that I use my life to revolve around. So if I want to travel, I want my work to be able to come with me. Work to me is not a restriction, but something that I should be able to take with me and be able to kind of do wherever, right? I think that's a big thing when it comes to Gen Z, this kind of digital native generation, is that this understanding that work is not something that controls me anymore. It's something that I also have flexibility around. I think this also kind of has to do with this idea of the workforce almost taking its power back, in the sense of not only am I looking for a company that wants me, but I also want to have a good company that I want to work for, right? So it's no longer just the company picking me, but I want to pick the company as well. Do their values match mine? Do their working models match what I want? Do their benefits, charitable incentive match my own values? That's something I definitely look for. And I think that's something that if organizations want to stay competitive and future-proof themselves for this next coming generation, should be looking at. These benefits and these wellness stipends aren't just fads, but they're here to stay if you want to attract a younger workforce. I'll pass it back to you, Rob.
No, I'll pass to Nikhil. Those are great points, and thanks for sharing your perspective on that. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think, Jasmine, you said it so well. I think I can absolutely as there are two Gen Z boys, and I think one was in grade 10 and grade 12 during the COVID, and they got so used to it. And I think like you rightly said, I talked to a lot of companies, and they're saying that, look, if we manage to do our studies from home and without actually going out to a school or getting on a school bus, why can't we work from home? And so I think that's the shift that's taken. Now there's this big debate that's happening, right? Well, should you be all at work or remote 100% or hybrid? And I think even in the hybrid, there's different models, 2+3 and 4+1. And I think that is very contextual. So every company will have to take a call what works for them. But what will be what won't change, to Jasmine's point, is something I would agree, and I think is beautifully said in one of the slides that in one of the talks I heard from the CEO of Microsoft, and he basically gives a 2x2 that says that, the future of work is shifting, where if you can kind of picturize a 2x2 where you have synchronous and asynchronous, right? So, and remote and together. So most of us, like, we do Zoom calls and team calls, right? So we're actually doing it either live, or let's say if I'm stuck somewhere and I'm, logging on a little late, I can actually see a recording. So there's that, and then I actually be in person doing that, and or could watch that in person from the office. So what he says is that the manager of the future, the employee of the future, will actually have to good in managing all those 4 quadrants, right? And so you cannot take the view anymore that, hey, back pre-COVID, I used to manage my team and I could see them, and if there was a problem, I could go knock on their door, they could come to me. I think we'll just have to accept that, that's the hybrid is the new normal. Now, what I will say, what makes it a little more easier if companies think through, is to answer these 3 questions: the when, the how, and the where, which is to say that, have defined really clear policies that say, hey, can I log in from the beach? I mean, I think that's unrealistic. Like, okay, so what are the rules around that? When can I be sending emails? Like, okay, what's the rule around that? I mean, should I do it late in the night, morning? And if the boss is doing it, then the subordinate is saying that, look, my boss is doing it, like, so what? I have to do it. So I think that's kind of the learned behavior. So I think all these rules around where, the when, being very culturally sensitive if you're working across geographies, to make sure that you're mindful of someone else's time zone and so on. And then also the how, right? What's the mechanism to do it, right? Should we use Slack? Should we use the shared server, right? So what's the technology supporting it? But as you rightly said, Robin, I'm sure you're seeing that, right? For your team and your employees, right? Where there's a preference to say that, hey, can I do it at work? And I was very lucky. I mean, I can think back almost 15 years back, and that was a long time back, way before, there was a COVID or anything. I was working for a company called Schwab in Bay Area, and they actually had implemented what they call the 980. So in other words, you work for 9 days, you do the 80 hours in 9 days, and you get the 10th day off. So every other weekend was a long weekend. And I tell you, this was so good, and not the whole company was having that. We just had it. It was like our top secret. But I think we were very productive. People did everything they were expecting to do, and nobody wanted to change that. So, I think it's open now. Everybody wants to kind of talk about the 4-day week and so on.
No doubt, yeah. 4-day work week. There's been that huge study out of the UK right over a couple of years that was talked about a lot last year. I remember that. Interesting, some feedback from the audience here too. Tanya saying that it's gonna be harder for organizations to find talent or fill positions if they're not having these remote first or flexibility in their opportunities and that sort of thing, which I think holds very true. I know we feel that it's pretty tough to ask people to be 9 to 5, 5 days a week in the office. I started there, and I know we had, older management want to see bums in seats and see, hey, Jasmine, you're working. Yeah, you're working on a blog. I can see you physically writing that blog, right? Now it's not that way anymore. So we have to have new systems, technology to enable us to, work asynchronously or connect. So maybe we could touch on that. What are you seeing in terms of technology and how that plays a role in creating a dynamic workplace? Maybe both of you, maybe Nikhil, you can go first, and then maybe Jasmine, you can follow up there.
Yeah, so I think, again, this is when you talk specifically about Gen Ys and Gen Z, I always distinguish the 2 generations by saying that Gen Y, or the Millennials, was the generation which started accepting technology, and Gen Z was the generation we started expecting technology. So there one was accepting and one was expecting. I think more tactically speaking, as I was saying, that post-COVID, right? I mean, now we have a plethora of choices, like do we do email or chat or Slack or Teams or whatever, right? And what companies have done, having learned from COVID and post-COVID, is that, again, have a simplified guideline, if you will, on what could be the best way to communicate, right? I think the Gen Zs, we can't blame them. And I see my son, like if he's doing something for his college assignment, like they don't write emails, they do only WhatsApp, and forget about even writing the text on WhatsApp. It's only just the voice calls on WhatsApp, right? And they don't even want to write. I mean, they're lazy. So I said that, how are you doing that? And there's like 20 people on that call, right? And so I think, I think companies are trying to just simplify that by saying that, look, if it was a formal interaction with the client, maybe an email is what we should do. And if it was sort of in the teams, like between the teams, maybe we could do a Slack or some tool
so having
like
some
that.
clear channel guidelines,
urgent,
channel strategy.
Yeah,
right?
like a channel guideline. And then if you're something urgent, like, if you wanted something, like I could text you and I can, and that's an indication that please reply back immediately, right? So that's one thing. The other thing I would say is when you talk more generally communication, Rao, I think the Gen Z is the one generation where they really, because of what they're born into social media and the internet, their expectation of feedback is just as quick. So in other words, if I put something on, LinkedIn, and I'm getting something back within 2 minutes, like that's what they expect from a boss to say that, if I
So
don't
annual
do
performance
something well,
reviews
like,
are no good anymore. Is that what you're telling me,
right.
Nikhil?
That's old, like done, right? Can we make it more real time or weekly or whatever, right? Whatever frequency works. But the idea is that I think, and a lot of companies who created a good high performing culture is all about, like, if you do it more frequently, and rightfully so, right? I mean, many companies are doing away with the traditional sort of bell curve, and so there's an expectation that you be good in giving feedback, taking feedback. And I would say to the managers that, look, if you're leading a team of Gen Ys or Gen Zs, right, be good at the skill of giving feedback to, because a lot of people get it intellectually, but they don't actually do it. Anyway, so that's one. Maybe Jasmine, you can add to it, and I don't know what's your thought.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest thing for me is I want to be kind of empowered to own my own work, right? Because we are digital natives, that also means we're able to kind of work by ourselves really efficiently. That doesn't mean to say that we don't enjoy being part of a team, but I enjoy kind of, this slang term of locking in, which means just kind of really focusing on my one task. And I want to be able to have kind of be able to go and grab the things I need and kind of just own it myself without having to, wait for someone to send me a document or wait for someone to, get their approval on something. Or, I'm kind of all about, things being streamlined, things being efficient, right? So it's so great here at IC that we're able to kind of host everything online, have a hub, a single source of truth that I can check whatever, whenever I want, wherever I want. And if I need something, I'm able to get it ASAP as opposed to kind of waiting again, right? So thinking about, again, like I said, I'm used to kind of remote work, but the idea of, if I need a document, I need to go into the office, I need to look through these files. I can't just, control F and search something, or I need to wait for someone to photocopy and then maybe it's somewhere lost. Those, to me, those seem as inefficiencies, right? Why would I waste my time doing that? And even though things like voice notes seem wild, I totally get that. Why not just send a text, right? But it kind of goes back to being streamlined and being efficient again.
Yeah, it's funny. I thought that was quite ironic, right? The sense of being lazy, yet it's actually being quite technically savvy, right? The ability to use things like voice to text. And I've got a 12-year-old, and my kids, they watch YouTube and they all these kinds of things. Everything is voice. They have voice speakers that they can interact with Google and these kinds of, like, it's a totally different interface, or there's basically no interface, right? It's just voice. So that's changing things a lot. It's actually more efficient. So if looking at it from that light versus being lazy to type out a text message or an email, it's interesting to hear it that way. So let's talk a little bit about leadership and structure. I'm curious on that side because that's changing quite a bit. There's a lot of pressure as well on that, the traditional, maybe more hierarchical structures or leadership, structures to support the overall workforce. What are you seeing as some of the changes that are happening there, Nikhil?
Sure. So look, I think if you one were to go and read the sort of the management literature, we had org structures evolve, right? So we had the the normal org structure and the matrix org structure, and now what they call the network structure, right? Which is to say that, more and more people should be, it's not the hierarchy, but the hierarchy. In other words, it's not so much like it's not so much like, okay, how many levels are up I'm seeing or sideways, right? It's how I can kind of meet the people that I want in the clusters, and who are the critical points. I think when it comes to the traditional hierarchy, look, for the Gen Z specifically, it's all about not so much the positional authority as much. It's about sort of the relational authority, and just I think they have much more respect for someone who can say that, look, I don't respect someone because they have a VP title to next to them or something. I mean, they respect you. It's not that, but I think compared to, maybe perhaps like a Gen Xer, I think they'll probably just take the boss's word. And yeah, if you watch that one movie, I'm trying to think, I think it's the movie's called The Intern, where this person is hired as a senior intern, and he doesn't leave till like the boss leaves, because he feels like that's the right thing to do, right? And so I think all those equations are going out of the window, right? And I've seen it, in many companies, many clients, they say that, look, they're independent. Like if their task is assigned, if they do it, right, you're not confined to sort of, be there 9 to 5. But to coming back to your question, I think for that generation, it is more about evidence-based leadership, right? So in other words, they want to feel what you say, who you are, and they want to experience it firsthand, right? So if you put on a wall that, we have to be authentic, and the boss is not kind of showcasing that, right? I think it's very quickly there's the lack of congruence. They can feel it. And this is a generation which actually voices that opinion, very quickly, rather than holding it back, right? Whether it's, and I've seen where, people have written open letters about diversity and so on and so forth, right? So I think the traditional sort of hierarchical structures are kind of going away. I think they also want where accessibility is there, and that's important, right? And I would also say that I think for whether it's right or wrong and good or bad is not that. As a beautiful sort of message from Simon Sinek in one of his videos, saying that back in the day, there was a time where we would go to church, and we would have the bowling alleys over for the community relationships, and we would have friends, and then work had one place. Now, all of that burden from our personal life is shifting into the workspace, right? So we're becoming more and more insular. We're going less to the church, or less to the temple, or less to wherever else we go. We're having less community. And so therefore, now I expect my boss or my company to help me find my purpose. Now I expect my company to find my ideology. I expect all the things that, so there was a working relationship which was independent in a personal life. But I think, like you said, I think those lines are blurred, which is to say that I think a lot of that is coming at the workplace. And therefore, I think people who are managing the Gen Zs, right, or the Gen Ys, I think they'll be much more mindful. How are they able to see stress, given what they've already gone through over the last 25 years of life, with witnessing a full pandemic and the wars they're witnessing, and all the things that we kind of read about climate change, we're actually witnessing it, right? In other words, I was reading this, someone said that 2023 was the hottest year. Like, I can feel it here, like it's already March and it's getting so warm, and so things like that. So I think, yeah. So those are some of the things that I would say that as a leader, you have to be careful when you think about looking at a Gen Z.
Yeah, absolutely. Those, go ahead, Jasmine. You talk.
Yeah, I just wanted to hop in here and say two things, because I keep meaning to jump in and say this, but I always forget. If you have any questions or anything like that, please feel to pop that into the chat. I meant to say it at the start, and now we're 40 minutes in and time has flown by, but please feel free to, and we'll get to them at the end or as they come up. But Nikhil, I really like what you said about this idea of authenticity, right? So I think with Gen Z, the title doesn't define my relationship to you. It's more if I kind of respect you because I see that you're authentic. Gen Z is really smart when it comes to sniffing out BS, right? We don't kind of deal with it, and we are a generation that is going to speak up. One of the, not feedback, so one thing people tell me about my character is that I'm blunt, right? But I think more that I'm straightforward and I'm just telling the truth, right? Why wouldn't I speak up? Why wouldn't I speak my mind? Why wouldn't I kind of if something that doesn't agree with my internal value system, like, why wouldn't I say something about it? And I think that also kind of translates to this idea of purpose. I think that this generation really holds their purpose, or kind of doing good above all else. And we expect our work to kind of funnel all into our purpose, right? So not necessarily that we're looking at work to kind of help us find our purpose, but we found our purpose, and why doesn't work kind of feed into that? So I'll pass back to you, Rob.
Yeah, I think, purpose and values is so important. And I like what you said, Nick. I can see the evidence for that very clearly, how the work life is becoming so much more important as a center for social relationships and community relationships and things like that, versus it being quite separate from before, which is quite interesting, as you touched on that. I think when we talked earlier, you actually talked about, engaging Gen Z in things like setting vision, clarifying purpose, having those discussions around that, and even some tactics like reverse mentoring was a tactic you mentioned earlier on. Maybe you could touch a few on those.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the things that every company is grappling with more generally, Rob, is this notion of engagement. And I think even more so for a variety of reasons, right? I think post-COVID, we're all sort of kind of feeling, as someone rightly said, that while technology may have kind of grown, but we're becoming as a society more lonelier, as scary, or as we may disagree with that, but it's just saying that I think because we're becoming more insular. And in many ways, as talking to a colleague or a friend, he says that, back in the day when we had to go to a school, like we would actually have to go to a building or go somewhere to find and get things done. Now, I have a nephew, he says everything is online, right? Like you can order food and you can pick your classes and you can watch your videos, right? And so that's one. But coming back to your question on the engagement, I think that companies are using a variety of methods, right? I think the first is moving away from what we call like the extrinsic factors, the intrinsic factors. So the salary matters. I think all of those standard things that we look for, like, hey, I want a title, I want a brand, I want this, I want that. All of that's there. But I think, as Jasmine was alluding, the intrinsic is more about, do I have the freedom to make a decision, right? I mean, I've known companies like in manufacturing where they'll just wait for the boss to say what to do, they'll execute and they'll go home. And they'll keep doing that for year after year after year. But this generation just not gonna do it. And therefore, they want autonomy. They want to make sure that they're learning. I think that's where this is very important for companies to make sure that they create a learning culture. We went back and spoke about the fact that, problems are becoming complex. And so learning is not just about like, can I help you learning in your job, but can I also expose you to other things, right? Can I rotate? Can I give you other assignments? Can I have you shadow me? Can I have you see more other? So I think if you can create that culture, I think there's more reason for them to stay. So there is the learning and skilling, and especially in light of what we're seeing with AI and all the prediction about the entry-level jobs are being gone. The other is the two concepts, Rob, very quickly. There is a concept what we call a shadow board. A lot of companies are doing what we call the shadow boards, which is essentially like they're taking the population or the cohort which is younger in the system, so it's for Gen Ys and Gen Zs, and they become kind of the voice of all the things that they want to test and pilot, right? So I'll give you a couple of examples. Like we work for an insurance company in Europe, and they wanted to craft their mission statement and vision and so on. And right, instead of having the senior leaders to do that, they actually went out to the Gen Ys and Gen Zs and said that, how would you do it? Right, and because you're going to be the future leaders, right? And over the next 20 years, it's you who will be running the company, and you will be managing the clients, and you will be talking to the investors, right? And so there's the concept of shadow board, which essentially depicts a real board, except that you're having a mirror board, which is becoming another perspective. Reverse mentoring is just that, but in a different way, where you're actually taking a Gen Z who's very digitally savvy, right, and helping someone like a Gen Xer to kind of get up to speed on the technology and so on. So there are many things. Gamification is there, learning culture is there, but above all, I think the one thing which matters the most is the ability to give them the comfort and create trust. I think this is very crucial and important, especially in light of post-COVID, what has happened with all the information. So I think the more we can share with them, the more we can make them feel that, look, we want to be as transparent as we can. And whether it's just salary, whether it's job, whether it's promotion, all the things that we say, right? I think gone are the days where like the prior generations are very happy just to say, you know what, like I didn't get it this time, I didn't get the promotion, maybe next time. They just live with it.
Yeah.
And with this generation, you cannot just kind of force down that view, right? They have to be convinced. I think, anyways, these are some of the points. Jasmine,
Yeah,
I don't know
really, those are
if
great examples. I love it. And I mean, you showed earlier the slide of change, right? And the amount of paradigm shifts
yeah.
and technology and pressures that, that exacerbates things where, people aren't just clocking in, clocking out and being okay with their job for a year or two and that kind of thing. It's like, no, I want to be challenged. I want opportunities. I want, some of that autonomy you described. I think those are great. We've seen this gig economy. I think there was a stat I saw about 40% of the US workforce has side gigs. There's part of the gig economy,
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
Fivers, the Upworks, that sort of thing. So to help me with, I got a difficult question for you. Some of the older paradigm or thoughts is if somebody applies to your company and they've job hopped a lot, right, on the resume, and you go, hey, that's the flag. They're not loyal, right? Tell me about that paradigm shift and how that mentality might need to be rethought with these kinds of things we're talking about. How do we keep people loyal? How do we keep Gen Zs loyal and stay with us longer than a year and hop to something else, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think there is a lot. I think the burden is shifted on the employer, Rob, as you rightly said. It's more on them. What can they do to welcome? And I think the other day when we were just chatting, it's all about. I go back to, what's the employee value proposition? We're not just giving them a career path. We're actually giving them an experience, or we want to give them an experience, right? So the story that I was sharing the other day was that, the SAP as a company, just as an experience, even before they come on board, it's like, okay, how do I attract? Because I know that Gen Z is on, social platforms like TikTok and Snapchat and so on, right? So the top 40 leaders of that company have actually created 2-minute videos as a way to say that, you know what, this is why you should come and work for us. They don't expect them to go and look at boring annual reports or, things like that, because they'll actually go and do their homework and looking at, sites like Glassdoor or Fishbowl and so on anyway, right? But can you kind of, so they're doing that. They're going a step further to say that, okay, if you're working in Vancouver, where can I go for, where are the places for me to shop? Where are the places for me to do, A, B, C, D, whatever, right? So I think it's about selling experiences. It's about making sure, and a lot of things, what I'm saying, and I know the Gen Zs may not like to hear this, but a lot of the HR fraternity that I speak to, Rob, they also say that there is a strategy or there's a move to give what I call micro promotions or macro sort of promotions. In other words, they see benefit in promoting that generation more frequently, just in a way to hold that. I mean, so I've seen where there may be like 4 changes in the title over the, let's say, like last 4 years. The job itself isn't changed drastically, but it's a good retention strategy. So, so if I this may sound very crude, but so if I'm hired as a manager, like I become a senior manager, or then an assistant manager to a manager to a senior manager, right? So at least like they're feeling that, look, I'm growing in the organization. Again, these are very tactical things, but I think these are things that you have to now shift towards and give them the employee value proposition is sort of changing, right? Then the classical, what we say, you got a salary, you got a title, and off you go, and you deal with a bad boss and you're happy, you're going to swallow it. That's not going to work.
Yeah, I remember taking in a speaker, I think it was a couple of years ago, talked about the concept of tours of duty. An employee coming in and they come to do a project or some initiative, it's something they're mainly hired for, and then they complete that. Now, what's the next tour of duty? Like, what's the next project or that sort of thing? I think of it less of a title and a role. I thought that was quite an interesting presentation. I'm curious, actually, you touched on obviously values and purpose really important in the hybrid workplace, and you talked about students not having to go to school and be with people. How do you organizations still establish that sense of belonging, community, in this hybrid different world we're in now? Maybe we just touch on that question a little bit. And Jasmine, you could maybe give some of your thoughts too.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this all goes back to authenticity, right? So when I come to a workplace like I feel I can feel the vibe, another slang, okay? Maybe I'll teach you some more. I feel like the vibe of everybody here is very, trustworthy, they're authentic, they are their real selves, right? So I'm able to kind of more be open. So a really fun anecdote is that in February I ran my first half marathon, right? So, and even before I signed on to do anything, I saw that one of my coworkers, Michelle, she's our HR office manager, she had posted on our company announcements just kind of congratulating me on it. I thought that was such a sweet, kind gesture, right? That she, knew that there was a big accomplishment for me and decided that, why not tell everybody about it? And this was not something I had to prompt to, but she just kind of wanted to because she wanted me to feel good. She wanted me to feel proud. And she was really proud of me and she was genuinely proud of me. I thought that was really great, right? So I think organizations really need to focus on this idea of authenticity, right? I'm not interested in, oh, hey, congrats when I feel like you don't actually care about me. I think all starts from this culture of care, this culture of trustworthiness, this culture of authenticity, I think. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I will only say, I think that excellent point that one way to easily kind of make that happen is the getting into a culture of giving and receiving feedback. And I think more formally or informally you can do that. I think they're able to experience, right? Because in the traditional organization, we've always seen that, oh, okay, we give feedback at the end of the project, or something goes really drastically bad, or maybe at the end of the 6 months when we're going live with that, that launch or whatever. I think we have to relook at that very differently to say that, look, it's not about, when something happens or when we hit that milestone. Can we get into the habit of creating a conversation? And that goes back to the stereotype question that you asked, Rob, that I think that's where you can break some of that, right? I think the Gen Zs are like any other generation, right? I mean, in fact, we look back to when we're in that age bracket, right? So I think a lot of what we say that they should be doing, they're not doing, right? I think if a boss can kind of demonstrate, as Jasmine was saying, being authentic, creating the trust, and I think the Google story I may have shared this before, where Google did the experiment of, what does it take to run a high performing team? And so they actually study 180 teams, and then they found out that their hypothesis was that, okay, maybe it's people with high IQ and similar personalities and so on. But what they found out is that it's just the safe environment that the team really wants. It's not so much about putting the smartest people and the same kind of personalities together, right? As long as the team leader can create that environment, that's what matters. And yeah, I think those are some of the ways in which can the boss actually deliberately think about how can we help them succeed. I think flip the equation to say that who's working for whom. Are you working for the boss, or is the boss there to make you succeed?
Yeah,
I think the
really
moment
good
you
point.
take that positioning, that's where you can see the loyalty immediately coming back to you, right? And
Yeah.
most people kind of don't think it like that.
It's more the servant leadership approach, right? And you talked at the beginning about agility and how important that is, and being agile in these conversations and feedback loops, encouraging that. I think this is a great way of doing it as well. I know we're kind of close to the end of the hour, Jasmine. I don't know if we want to offer some question and answer period for people in the audience. There's been some great dialogue on the side and commentary back and forth. I know Lauren and Tanya have shared some feedback and have enjoyed some of the discussions so far. If anybody has questions, there is a Q&A little button on the top. If you want to ask Nikhil a question, or Jasmine, or whatever you'd like to cover next. I do have some more questions I can get into, but if people have some questions, definitely encourage some from the audience. Have you seen any, Jasmine? I haven't looked into the...
I haven't seen any questions. I've seen a lot of commentary from Tanya and Lauren, which I've been loving. I think that they have some really great things to say. So I've been really interested in
we should have
reading
widened
that.
our panel. I think we could have had some
I
other
know,
contributors
they're
here.
experts as well, for sure.
Yeah.
No, Nikhil,
I do
you're
wanted
in
to
my mind.
quickly.
I feel like sorry, I was just gonna say I feel like Gen Z so well, perhaps even better than I do as a bona fide young person. So that's awesome to hear you speak. I can offer more, just touching on that retention. I know that a big thing that organizations are scared about is, this idea of job hopping, right? So I was talking to one of my friends and he mentioned that he was looking for work. And I initially thought, oh my gosh, what happened? Did he get laid off, or did something happen? But what he talked to me about was that he has a 2-year rule. So he stays in an organization for 2 years max before, going to a different organization. And to me, I'm thinking, okay, you have 2 years, that's like a decently long time, because 2 years is 10% of my life, right? If I'm being completely honest here. But perhaps someone to a VP, they're looking more for 10. But I can't imagine staying at an organization for 10 plus years. But at the core of that is this idea of growth, right? If I don't feel like I'm growing at an organization, no matter what, I'm going to feel like I'm going to leave, right? Because I feel like Gen Z, this idea of growth also leads to this idea of I want to make an impact, right? I prioritize myself, I prioritize my experience, and I want to be able to kind of grow what I know. And if this organization isn't, empowering me to do that, well, maybe another one will. Right. So I think organizations really need to understand that Gen Z wants to work, but more importantly, it wants to grow.
It's funny, Jasmine, I have a really good friend that has a 5-year rule, and he's a Gen Xer. So see, it's just accelerating this pace that it's got to be 2 years.
This
it's
keeps
going to
coming
be 1
down.
year with, as we get to the alpha generation, it'll be 6 months. No, I'm just kidding. It's just the pace of change, right? Like the pace of learning and unlearning, as you talked about, Nikhil, it's faster. So it makes a lot of sense what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Next thing works open source. Yeah. Well, I tell my kids that the most important skill they need to learn is critical thinking, and some of the soft skills, because a lot of these technical skills are being automated, right? It's interesting world we're in right now.
Yeah, and especially because Rob, we're in a time there's so much information being fed to us, right? So it's very easy to believe where you watch a news flash or just something, right? Like, and the critical thinking is very essential. Like if you're seeing, one view of, why this conflict is happening or why that isn't happening or what, like I think that's I would almost say that it's important for everybody, but even more so for Gen Z, because they're at a time like they're bombarded with so much more than perhaps what we were, lucky enough to not have that, maybe in blessing in disguise to not have so much of that, because every piece of information, there's contradicting information, right? So
information and misinformation too, right? I mean,
misinformation,
you see all the deep
right.
fakes and AI stuff that's happening now. It's kind of scary.
Yes, absolutely.
We're near time here, Jasmine. I don't know if Nikhil, I think we had a couple of slides and maybe you wanted to wrap up. I don't know if any questions have come in. Maybe they haven't. If there is follow-up questions, feel free to send them to us after. I think our contact information is here as well. I don't know if you want to, Nikhil, touch on some key takeaways maybe for us. That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I think this is just as a way to summarize some of what we kind of showed in the beginning, to say that, look, the nature of problems in the world today are becoming more and more complex. They're what we're chaotic, which means to say that no one person can solve it. So there is no linear solution or a way to look at it, which means that all the more reason for why we need an experienced hand and a boomer, an Xer, and then also the fresh perspective from a Gen Y or a Gen Z. And so that's very important. And so no one person has the answers. And you also have to keep in mind that more and more, even the existing workforce of the Gen X's and boomers will be working longer. So companies are figuring out what can they do to keep them engaged as well. So that's just as a challenge as much as you see the challenge on this side. And as we spoke, the shift in demographic requires us to understand what's going to inspire. Because if you look at the runway ahead, right, if you fast forward out, 15, 20 years, there's a very good chance if you're a Gen Xer, if you're a room of people right now with about 20 people, and let's say half of them are Xers and maybe some boomers and a few Gen Zs, I think that will be completely different as you think fast forward out, right? Because it's tilting towards where the Ys and Zs will become much more mainstream cohort as to what they'll lead. And then, of course, we spoke about just doing away with the stereotype and making sure that the generation conflict can be a real issue if we don't take the time. There's a kind of a danger to that. But if we do things like the assumption audit and some of the things that we spoke about, engagement and the workplace flexibility and so on, right? I think we can actually harness the power of generational power.
Thanks very much, Nikhil. I know you shared a lot of good practices and tactics along the way too. So I'm sure hopefully everybody here walks away with something of interest, something that they're thinking about, that they can take away.
Absolutely. Oh, look at that.
Yeah, and if you want to hear more from Nikhil, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jasmine. You go ahead, please.
If you want to hear from work from Nikhil or interested in any other resources, he has this really top-selling book, Target Gen Z, where he kind of gets into the nitty-gritty about how brands can understand Gen Z, their buying habits, and their distinct traits and expectations, as well as this podcast, Working with Gen Z. He has topics and episodes on every single topic when it comes to Gen Z under the sun, from work, relationships, spirituality, and so many more, and lots of great guest speakers as well. You can also take a look at his TED Talk, his YouTube, lots of great stuff here, Nikhil. His LinkedIn is attached to the webinar invites that everybody got. So please go ahead and take a look. He's a great resource, and we're so happy that he could join us today. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for everybody for joining. If you want to hear more from Internet Connections here or about creating dynamic workplaces, you can check out our free resources on our blog. We have some really great blogs about managing dispersed teams, unlocking the power of company culture. And then we have this really great webinar from Southside Bank, this kind of enterprise organization that engaged 800 plus employees, multi-generational, everyone included. And that's a great resource as well. So I just want to wrap up there, and I want to thank everyone for joining us here. I know I learned something. We hope everybody else learned something as well. We'll all get a recording sent to your email after. Feel free to share that, and we hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks so much, Nikhil, Jasmine. Really appreciate all the points you made.
Enjoyed it.
It was so nice to have you today. And yeah, I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Take care. Really enjoyed it. Bye.